Welcome to the Cyber Fusion Report, the show where we cut through cybersecurity noise and focus on what actually protects operations, infrastructure, and your business. This podcast is built around one core idea: cyber fusion. A cyber fusion center brings together IT security, operational technology, engineering insight, and human risk into a single coordinated defense strategy. So threats are detected earlier, response is faster, and operation stays running. Each episode, we sit down with security leaders, operators, and industry experts to unpack the real threats facing modern organizations, especially where cyber risk becomes operational risk. No hype, no theory, just practical insight on cyber resilience, operational continuity, and defending critical systems without disruption. If you're responsible for uptime, safety, or business continuity, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Cyber Fusion Report, where we explore the intersection of cybersecurity, operational technology, and leadership in an era where cyber risk increasingly translates into operational risk. Industrial organizations today are investing more than ever in cybersecurity. New tools, new platforms, more monitoring, more detection. Yet incidents continue to disrupt operations, halt production, and create real business risk. In many cases, the problem is not a lack of technology. It's a lack of alignment between cybersecurity leadership, operational teams, and executive decision making. That gap is one of the reasons the role of the Virtual Chief Information Security Officer, or vCISO, has become increasingly important, especially in organizations that operate critical industrial systems. Today, we're going to explore what that role really looks like inside operational and IT technology environments. I'm your host, Gary Mullen. Joining me are two leaders who work at the intersection of cybersecurity strategy and operational reality. Terry McCorkle, founder and CEO of FishCloud, whose work focuses on helping organizations strengthen cyber resilience across both IT and operational environments. And Joshua Nicolson, founder and CEO of DarkStack 7, a firm that delivers elite cybersecurity advisory, incident response, and AI-era cybersecurity leadership to global enterprises and highly regulated industries. Welcome, gentlemen. In this conversation, we're going to discuss how vCISOs work with organizations today, the unique challenges of securing operational technology environments, the growing role of artificial intelligence in cybersecurity, and how organizations can better prepare for incidents ranging from network intrusions to ransomware events that significantly impact operations. Because in industrial environments, cybersecurity decisions are not just technical decisions. They're operational decisions that affect uptime, safety, and business continuity. So, gentlemen, if you're ready, let's get into it. The first question today, Joshua, I'll focus it on at you, is really around what the vCISO role is and what it looks like. From your perspective, working with organizations today, what does the day-to-day role of a vCISO actually look like, and how's it different from the traditional IT-focused CISO model that most companies are using and are familiar with today?
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show, and very good question. So sometimes it depends on how you use the word virtual CISO. Sometimes it's strategic advisor. How do you bring in expertise that can advise strategically? We sometimes are careful of the term vCISO, especially if there already is a CISO there, and it's like, well, I don't need leadership here. I need some tactical or some strategic execution. So you can see where the vCISO or fractional security executive really sits in a model to help deliver services that you would have to hire for, or you'd have to hire expertise, really expensive expertise. And what you're finding is that the fractional model allows someone like myself to be in multiple accounts, learn from multiple things, and bring that expertise to someone in a fractional model where they can understand what their spend is. They don't have to spend a lot on a full-time resource. They get the expertise they need. And it provides some of this oversight on risk management before it becomes a truly a larger issue. A lot of the virtual CISO programs come in really three flavors. You could see where a company may need someone who's more of a audit background, and they do audits and they do assessments, and they see the virtual CISO as a business risk function. Well, that's great. You have those type of CISOs that are aligned to doing that. Then you have that second tier, that middle tier, which is really someone who has an IT background. They used to build servers and they see things as IT security, which IT security really is tool management in many cases. It's how do you configure McAfee? How do you configure the mail gateway? How do you configure these tools? But it's not the overarching program, which is cybersecurity, where you take a more holistic approach to security. You may be in that need where you need to transform from a basic IT management of security tools to a truly cybersecurity program based on standards, based on frameworks. And then you want to be able to take that and have a different one from time to time. Let's say you may be in a transformational need to do more of a risk management type virtual CISO or fractional executive. Maybe you're in the role that where you really have cyber risks that you need to bring in a more technical. So it really helps bridge the strategic side of it versus the tactical, which is a lot more mundane, but rarely translates to a more strategic vision of what you need to do. I know that was kind of long, but any questions about any of that?
That absolutely makes sense, and it's really helping fill those gaps that organizations all have, right? Like you said, you got different types of CISOs. You need people to help complement the areas that you may not have as much experience in, right? And it's I see it becoming more and more as technology increases, right? The breadth of knowledge that somebody has to have is increasingly more difficult to manage.
Yeah, you view it into the AI world too. What happens in mergers and acquisitions, and all of a sudden you consolidate LLMs and with past data and just we thought about it from a database perspective. I've been in the banking world for a long time, right? But when now you have AI systems that are actually running workflows and making decisions on different things, it gets kind of scary on how do you do a merger acquisition. Well, if you're just struggling to keep track of day to day, the vulnerabilities that are coming at you, the incidents that are coming at you, the audits you got to fill out, how do you even consider taking on another company from a transformation perspective? And so my time at Booz Allen Hamilton, that consulting company, they really knew transformations. That was kind of their bread and butter. When I was at E&Y, it was more of risk management consulting. So how do you put a security program together, current state, future state roadmap? But you can see kind of where you need a little bit more than that nowadays. You need a CISO that is now having to opine on business level things because now AI crosses the boundary between like security tool sets and business processes and data. And it gets a little confusing, a little kind of gray area. Wouldn't you think, Terry?
Oh yeah, it's a constantly changing environment. So, just being a young person coming up in IT and then getting into cybersecurity and doing red teaming and seeing all the different network types and architectures, and you're all usually, if you're inheriting an environment like that, there's a lot to learn, a lot to know, and a lot to figure out if you're new to an environment. Like, what's the actual state of that environment as it sits today? So,
Yeah, and I think the risk management piece is when you slam these two companies together from a merger acquisition, I've just seen is horrible.
yeah,
I remember one merger I was on, it was two pharmaceutical companies, and the company we were acquiring said that, yes, they used CrowdStrike, and that was their tool for EDR for management, and that they would use that to quarantine machines if there was a risk. Well,
yep.
you can't actually verify any of that until after legal day one. And then when legal day one's over, then they give you log-ons and you get on and what you find out, they didn't even have the license to quarantine machines. So yes, they had 2,000 desktops, but if there was a threat on one of them, they couldn't quarantine it. They never even attempted it. And so I said, wait a minute, in 2.5 years, you never had an alert? on the CrowdStrike system. They said, yeah, we don't know what most of them mean, so we think they're false positives. So here they false posited everything, and
Yep.
um, they false positive everything, and they never quarantined a machine before. Yet when we did the merger due diligence on the questionnaire, they said they had an EDR, and they said that that's what they would quarantine. Never once did they say that they don't even have the license for that. And so we had to buy like $40,000 license and throw it into the merger acquisition budget that wasn't even accounted for. So you could see this kind of risk comes up all the time where somebody just wants to sell a company off. They're not going to tell you that, hey, yeah, we got DLP, but it's in the closet and nobody ever does anything. They all say, yeah, DLP is implemented and so forth. So you're really getting the ground truth on that. You can see where a vCISO service really fits into that. And there's also a sanity check. Imagine if you're the CISO for a big company manufacturing and you're just trying to figure out what solution to do what. Well, who do you call? Who do you pick up the phone and give a call to? Is it just your friends that might not be in that same situation? What if you had a retainer? It wasn't that much, couple $1,000. You have a retainer on the board and you're able to pick up the phone and go, you know what? I'm trying to weigh my options between this vendor and this solution. And I mean, what else are you seeing in the market? That to me is golden because it prevents some massive failures in buying software for functionality you don't need. That happens in cybersecurity all the time. People choose tools that have so much advanced functionality that you're never going to use it. It's never really going to benefit you. Why pay for it? Go in with the free model first. But you have some pretty good friggin' salesmen, and they can do all that kind of stuff and sell the customer. And I do think that's where if you had that retainer of someone who's a multitude of counselors, right? There's wisdom, and that's where I think the vCISO kind of sits in.
You mentioned earlier that calling it a vCISO can sometimes make the role appear to be competitive with the CISO as opposed to complementary. How
Right.
do you get them to understand that you're there as their business partner to complement what they do, not replace them in any way?
Depends on how you come in. It's the same way if the court was ordering your wife to counseling versus you. I don't know. I mean, it depends on the client in many ways. Let's just say I had, for instance, when I was at EY, I had to do a board presentation. And the board was asking how, Josh, you've done a lot of these assessments and this is for a big insurance company. And they say, how do you know a program is mature, like when the first hour you walk through the door? I know you have to spend 40 hours, 48 hours, talking to everybody. But what is like the one thing you can walk in within 30 minutes and you go, oh my God, this is going to take longer than I thought? That was an interesting question. I never had a board ask me that before. And I said, well, I think it really is if you start talking to a CISO, one of the senior executives, and you ask them how their program's going and how they're managing the risks, and all they do is give you product names. I got IBM on the back end. I run Splunk. I run CrowdStrike. And they just throw the top brands at you. Then then they're hiding true risks that's under. They're not even speaking the right language. They're using these brand names to intimidate whoever they talk to. And I stated that to the board. And then their CISO came in to that same meeting about 15, 20 minutes later, sat down and did that exact thing. Said, hey, we have CrowdStrike, we got Splunk, and the entire room like to die. They're putting their head down because they realize that is, you can't hide behind these tools anymore. You actually have to have a repeatable program to manage risk moving forward. The same way you can't do a pen test once, get the result, and then go, hey, we did it once and it was 3 years ago. And there has to be a consolidated management of risk. Now that even more, because the boards just recently got hit, I think it was an SEC finding or a new rule of some sort where the risk is moving up to the board now, and they have to have cybersecurity experience. So you see the vCISO role at the board level now, because what happens is that the board says, we're going to implement cybersecurity and we're going to make sure our customers are protected. Great. That goes down to the CISO, the CIO, and they go to implement that strategy. However, when the budgets and the strategy come up and it's like these multi-million-dollar systems or it's this or that, they have no idea if that really matches to the original objectives they gave them on the program. So how do they translate that at the board level if the CISO and them aren't very good at doing that anyway? Imagine having your own board level CISO, a vCISO, and it's fractional executive, and you're giving them guidance on some of the board material that's going back to them, and can even give them those, I would ask more in this area, I would look here. Because a lot of times the board is related to the business that they're in. If this is a fintech company, their financial background, they don't really know cyber. And I think it's always having their best interest on how do you explain that into the investors versus the other way. You can just spend infinitely in cybersecurity and get the same result as someone who's not spending infinitely, and they have a very smaller budget, but they're much more disciplined on what they go after and what they do. So that's kind of where I think it benefits both management and board level.
Yeah, great answer. So Terry, you're an OT expert, and you're well aware that the plant floor environment introduces challenges that the majority of traditional security leaders really aren't used to dealing with. From your perspective and experience, what are some of the unique complexities and operational constraints that a vCISO could or would encounter when working with industrial systems, and where do organizations typically underestimate the difficulty in working in that environment?
Yeah, there's a lot of challenges when you're talking about integrating OT or operational technology. You say it's a manufacturing environment, or Josh mentioned pharmaceuticals. You have an environment that is essentially what the military refers to it as cyber to physical, right? You've got an environment where you can create a cyber effect that then creates a physical effect in the real world, whether it's spinning something up or increasing pressure on a device, or whether it's just looking at and monitoring the data from those devices. There's a lot of different challenges in the OT environment versus the IT environment. For example, most IT environment that you're working with a server or a computer or something that has a familiar operating system. Once you get in the OT environment, it's been built by engineers, certified people who build plant operations, and they don't typically have cybersecurity built in to those programs. They're starting to get there, but just realize that these systems are designed to be around for 20 or even 30 years, right? Some of the shorter ones, maybe 15, but they don't get upgrades very often. And upgrading or patching software in those environments is a challenge because it takes the plant offline. There's risk of upgrading things. So the process that they use to manage the OT environment is completely different than the IT. And the way to look at that is in the IT security industry, they have the CIA triad, right? Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. In the OT environment, you can flip that on its head. They're more interested in that availability. It has to be up, it has to be working. And then they dive into the data to try to build efficiencies on that process. But most of those environments weren't built with security monitoring controls. They have done things like, create a separate division or a separate segment of the network, right? A lot of it's called microsegmentation now in the OT industry. They're really trying to roll out, each environment has its own environment, and you have to go through a jump box to get into it, for example. So you have to go to a machine that has access to that environment. So that's kind of how they've approached securing these devices that are really difficult to secure, really difficult to monitor, is given their own environment. But it doesn't necessarily give you the same level of visibility that you would in a security operations center, for example. It's looking at Azure logs, looking at the identity and access management logs, looking at firewall logs. A lot of the OT environments don't have that level of visibility. They still have an IT network. It helps run the OT network, but they're considered separate environments. So when you're talking about this to the board, the challenge really comes down to how do you understand the risk in your operational technology environment, the heart of your company, the place that makes the widget or produces the product. And it's I think eye-opening for organizations now. They're seeing these attacks happening, and they're realizing that you can lose your operations if a successful cyber attack targets you. So it's it's really an interesting change in the way people are looking at it today, but it is a challenging environment. So you really have to focus on, how do people get access to those environments, and not just getting access to those types of logs, the north-south type logs, but the east-west logs. What are the devices doing inside that environment that nobody else can see? And that's where I see the biggest blind spots and the biggest challenges for organizations today. And just to jump on one additional piece, if you work with organizations that have their operations folks and their IT folks, and they may not know each other, right? They may not ever talk to each other. So the chances of being able to actually respond to a cyber attack in a real-time environment and successfully contain that becomes a lot more challenging, because if it's the first time that organization has ever had to actually work in the operations environment from a cybersecurity perspective, they have to learn it. So I always recommend, do tabletops. They're difficult, they're challenging. There's a lot of political play involved with them, but it surfaces those gaps, and it helps organizations start realizing that there's competing methodologies to how they manage their networks, and it doesn't often lead to good results if an attack actually does happen.
Uh,
Josh, what do you think? You see those sort of challenges in OT?
Definitely. It's more of a detective environment where you're doing more of the security by logs and by IDS sensors that are not in line. And there's a lot of stuff you can't touch. You could see different boxes. Like I was working for a pharmaceutical during my time at Booz Allen, and we had different boxes that were translating OT data over, like Nozomi boxes and stuff like that. And so we have to rely a lot from a security operations center. If you want to manage and monitor OT devices, you have to use some device like that can do some of the log correlation and so forth. You don't want to try and do that all yourself manually with a bunch of scripts
No.
and so forth. It's just not worth the timing for it. So you can see some of those tools are helping to bridge the gap between it. But yeah, they're two different worlds. One is, like you were saying, the CIA model, which is upside down because it is availability, to the point of even not putting malware, anti-malware, antivirus on machines because it takes too much of a hit
Right.
on the manufacturing in the event that one of the systems files is identified as a virus. So you can see just the stripping down of security in focus of availability. However, I think the OT world, if it was a little bit more modern in some cases, it would have the best of both of those kind of worlds. But it became difficult. And I think OT is really more about restoration than advanced cyber incidents. It's like, okay, if that box gets hit, how do you restore it and get back production versus how do you do a full investigation and figure out what really happened, right? It's a lot of times
That's
like hit the reset button and move forward,
that's exactly it. That's the reason I say it's so important to have those tabletops, because that's where the CISO and his team of analysts get to sit down with the engineers, and when they ask them, what do you do when you have this such and such problem? They're like, well, we reboot the box. And if it doesn't come back, then, we bring in the backup. So a lot of times they can't tell the difference between a cyber attack and an operational outage. But from a forensics perspective, from what you were saying, you have to be reactive and investigative, which means if they follow their normal process without thinking about the security implications, they're rebooting machines, and you've lost a lot of your evidence. So it
Yeah.
is interesting, just the different mentalities you have to deal with when you're in an OT environment.
When you're in OT. Yeah, like I just did a tabletop, but it was on IT, and I flew out to Tulsa, Oklahoma. And it was with a fintech, and we're working through this tabletop. And one thing that inevitably comes up, it's like, okay, you have backups. This is where your production system is. You need to fall over to alternative infrastructure now that you got hit with ransomware. does your provider have that? Yes, no. Well, what you find out is they have backups, but they can't restore it anywhere. They don't have the infrastructure to restore it anywhere. Oops, nobody thought about that. So when you walk through those attacks, you're like, okay, production processing system just went down. Do you have alternate path? Well, our disaster recovery is to go to tape, but it's over here. But we really don't. The database is so big. We don't even have NAS drive space to be able to restore it. So you run into these massive problems that come up through the tabletop exercise, especially if they're honest about what their capabilities are. That truly, and what I like to do with them is prep them to jump out of their phase and cause more problems. So for instance, trying to restore before having containment. If I don't have containment on a ransomware attack, don't try to restore the database on top of it and try to implement and get things going and up until containment's been obtained, because that just causes massive disasters of what is the state of your environment, what you just wiped out forensics data, but then you reinstalled a bunch of other stuff. It's stuck in the restoration process. All of a sudden you have a disaster instead of a security incident. You have a disaster recovery, and you made it worse. It was your fault. And so I think there is, when I walk through these tabletops, of just walking them through, okay, you're still in this phase. We don't have containment yet. We don't try to restore domain controller yet. And just walk them through it. And then when to call insurance. So many of these companies call them late and they don't engage them, and they have this service. They have breach in their contract, and they're supposed to, when this goes off, they have within 24 hours or 48 hours to go call the insurance. And the insurance would call people like me when I worked for incident response companies, and we would respond. But when we respond and the incident is hours old, if not days old, and you're trying to help out on the back end after they've done a million other things to the environment, a lot of IR firms turn around and they don't even take it. Like you've kind of messed the whole crime scene up, so to speak. It sounds like a mess here. I'm going to back up, and you probably need to call someone else. And so you want to try to avoid that. I think so. In those tabletops, we tell them, what's your insurance policy? Where's your BCP plan? Here's the 5 or 6 decision points I'm going to walk through in this incident. Who's responsible for what? And that comes up too. If we had to shut down a part of the network, who's got authority to do that? I don't know. It always goes to, I don't know, maybe it's the CIA, maybe it's the whole CEO you have to go to. Well, if we kind of figure that out early, just like in the Titanic here, you would know when to start putting the waterpress doors on. I don't think you need to call the captain if everything's flooding, right? Just put the freaking doors in. And that's what you want to walk out with them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Joshua, you have a front row seat with your company and what you do, a front row seat to what is happening across multiple organizations. With that knowledge and experience, what kind of major shifts are you seeing right now, and how companies are approaching cybersecurity? And more specifically, how is the role of the vCISO evolving as the industry kind of moves toward this institutionalized cybersecurity?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's so the whole market is kind of shifting to a fractional model where you have highly experienced people who've been doing this like 24 years, 30 years, like myself, and we want to be able to still work with individual customers on our own perspective. So you could see where you could put talent together like you never did before. Before, you would have to have this lot of money, hire a big 4 consulting agency. They would have all these different consultants that are there, and at the end you were hoping to have something of value from it. But you could see now where you have expertise in this fractional model where I can put a retainer together and I can move personnel in. Say I'm in a growth period. I need someone who's more tactical here, and we're building out a bunch of tactical cybersecurity things. So I would move fractional resources in to do that for the uplifting. And then towards the end of the year in Q3, I know I have to prepare for my Q1 strategy, because the board's going to want it at least 3 months ahead of time. And my management's going to want it before then to go through it and then start chopping things out. And of course, you create your sacrificial lambs, because you know there's going to be something gets chopped out of it. And you want to act all disappointed when the thing you thought was going to get cut anyway, it gets cut. So you always want to make sure that plan's there. But then you need to have maybe bring some resources in that because you're overwhelmed, but we know we need to get that strategy done. Why can't I use that retainer for the year, someone who already knows my business, they already know my risks. I can just now put them towards, hey, can you shift from that tactical side and kind of move over towards the strategic and help me put this together? That is extremely valuable because of the uplift that it has to an executive and their ability. If you go through a hire, let's say you try to hire for that position, 3 months to 6 months to get someone in. It's probably, a good 2, 3 months before they're effective. And then you start finding out they're not in the right role and they're not the right person for this anyway. And then you have to find someone else. You're 6, 8, 9 months into it, especially when you're hiring.
Hmm.
You got to put somebody on a performance improvement plan. And they're kind of tired of that, especially consulting companies. If you look at consulting companies from a bench management, you normally have to go hire a bunch of smart people, pay their salary, their medical, and then find a bunch of engagements to hopefully get them engaged so you're not losing money on the bench. And then when you don't, you have too many people, you have to let people go. Then some big project comes in and you don't have enough people. And so it's just pendulum swinging on the professional services staff. And so it's much
Hmm.
easier now to use consulting companies, like one is Eugene Zonda that I'm a part of. And we're all fractional people. We come together in a much bigger company in order to provide services and so forth. So that business model, especially in the US, because it's so easy to form companies in the US and get an LLC or a C Corp, and to do that, where others it's a little bit more difficult. But that is a brand new business model. The whole fractional CISO, the whole fractional AI officer as a service. I have that launching now in my practice, and where it's not just cybersecurity management, but it's like AI governance. How do I just put together a team with some SMEs and we figure out what the policies are for AI? What is the risk management structure we're going to adhere to that comes with ethics and controls and so forth? And then what is some of the automation tools when we start looking at how do we do the business? Are we going to use agents here? We're going to use Copilot, Bedrock, some solution here. So you could see the three different levels that customers are now going through. And what do you try to do? Hire some really expensive AI guy, or do you find a company that is fractional CISO, fractional AI officer type roles? I don't know. Does that make sense?
I, I think it's one of those situations where, again, we talked about this earlier. There's just not enough expertise to bring somebody in and give them necessarily a full-time position within an organization. If it's a project that they're good at and they knock it out, there's not always something to move them on to. So giving, this way you can actually, like you said, kind of slice it up, give it to an expert who can focus on that area, be more efficient, and as an organization, bring in the expertise you need on demand.
Yeah. And when it comes to the
So,
AI service, for instance, you need the first one was just, what are we going to do? What is the base
right.
policy that we wanted to adhere to before trying to do anything fancy? That to me, that it builds the use cases for the other pieces. So if it's a three-phase process, one is that first maturity level one, which you have like the ASIS model that has maturity level one, where you just have your hands around policy. Like for this university that I put a proposal together for, it was, can the students use ChatGPT? Can faculty use ChatGPT? Can we use them to grade papers? They just wanted somebody to walk through these risks with them and develop policy on what the university should do, and then put some governance program that says, hey, once a quarter, we're going to meet and we're going to bring some SMEs and we're going to talk about whatever the next topic is in AI tool sets and what's your strategy moving forward. So you can see where kind of all three of them is what I see is exploding in the market right now.
Yeah.
So makes sense.
So let's talk a little bit more about AI since it's come up several times in the conversation so far. It's becoming uh, a part of nearly every cybersecurity discussion today. And you've mentioned a couple of use cases already, but from a vCISO perspective, how is AI actually being applied? What are some of the practical use cases that you guys see emerging? How is AI influencing things like you mentioned policy development, risk standards, and at the end of the day, overall risk management frameworks within an organization?
Mm. Yeah, that's a good question. I could tell you one thing I see in organizations doing is one is I love being able to take what used to be static data on an intranet and take that and make that via an agent in order to be able to onboard people. One of the hardest things I had to go through is taking a junior person and onboarding them into a cybersecurity ops team. You have to take a senior person offline. They got to sit there with this guy. They got to tell them why you can't log into service now. It just is a real pain. And then you point them to outdated documentation. So I think from having an agent base that's learned on your policy, let the security team concentrate on real hardcore policy perspective and let the agents answer questions. So for instance, I started a new company. I want to know how I report a cyber threat. Do I start doing intranet searches and looking through the 20 pages that come back because there might be a Word document somebody wrote 4 years ago? Or am I able to use an agent for that and say, what are the security policies for this? And get a very distinct language response that's grounded in the true policy and the risk of the organization. And the agent is not allowed, it has the guardrails on it, it's not allowed to go make it up and go outbound. These are your data sources. This is the knowledge, the base of truth. And so to me, the hardest thing about policy is getting everybody, A, to know about it, B, to adhere to it. So I think there's AI solutions to help users for that, because I would use that if I didn't know, I'm new at a company and I didn't know where something at. I would use the agent. It says, to ask where this is or where's the policy for paternal leave. Do I just go to the HR SharePoint site and start searching around, or can I just ask, hey, what's the parental leave policy? And it pulls it up
Yeah,
and then references the document. I think you would take a
I
load off
think
of HR. You would take a load off of security people. You would actually start mapping, what you're really trying to do. And to me, it just helps a lot. I have a new guy start. I don't have to sit and waste a bunch of my time. The basic questions, and they feel terrible too, asking questions about stuff that, man, I wish there was a document I could just follow. Well, what if there was an agent that helped you on board? So I do think that that's an easy solution for some companies. It's like Microsoft Copilot based, where everybody has Azure for the most part. If you're in Microsoft O365 store and you're somewhat mature, you move into an Azure environment, and using Microsoft Copilot just plugs right into your data. So if you were saving things in SharePoint and that's where all your policies were at, then you can port an agent to that as the data source and distribute it to the call center people. And I don't know, I find that level of efficiency of just finding the answers to things without having to go email a bunch of people or send them Slack messages or whatever really can help from an agentic perspective. And it really doesn't matter your size. That's just a basic, how do I do um, document management to internal people, and how did the intranet die? Because the intranet, I mean, years ago used to have intranet managers, and they had all kind
right.
of development staff, and they created code, and that was the central farm everybody went to. If you didn't know, you wanted to put something in to get a credit card at Wells Fargo, you had to go to the intranet and there was some form for it. Well, I think that all moves agentic workflow, and it should, because managing that whole SharePoint, that became a whole job, SharePoint management, right? Um, but I
Right.
don't know. So I think it's changing businesses. I like using some of the other, like Claude, for some of my strategic work. I use different products like multimodal. So I'll use like Gemini for that. If I need pictures and images that look cool for some presentation I'm doing, I use that platform. ChatGPT for writing and all. But what'll happen is that as you build your business, like I've been building mine, everything's built in these AI platforms and SaaS platforms that are still there. QuickBooks, Ramp, all these kind of financial type, PandaDocs, DocuSign, all these kind of stuff. And your risk is now spreading out across all these SaaS applications and all these AI platforms, and you just don't even know it. It's sprawling that way. And it used to be just companies would have a direct risk relationship. I would have a risk relationship with you, and we would have NDAs and so forth. Now, when you use all these tools, they know so much about you. Um, One day I was going to say that an AI agent is going to testify against you in court. It's going to say, is Josh capable of doing this? And I'm telling you, he's going to be in court, and the agent's going to go, yeah, because he said this and he emailed his wife that and he did this and he did that. That's why I won't
AI
put
attorneys.
Yeah, I won't put Alexa in the house, because I don't need, my wife and I were in an argument or a dispute, and I need some other woman with photographic memory that's sitting there listening and going, Josh, you really did say that. So I don't need a third person to argue with. But you can see where they're going to move to the point of testifying against you. That's just going to be a point of it. Just like your email testifies against you as a document when you send email to people saying, let's do this, let's do that. I think the same
Yeah.
thing is going to happen with agents. And I don't know how we control that, because in many cases, it can't distinguish what's client sensitive and what's a client attorney or whatever. I mean, can you imagine telling the agent what's considered client attorney privilege in this case and what's private and what's not? I think it gets really complicated.
Yeah. So absolutely. I think one of the other areas that we're going to see a lot more adoption of AI is the efficiency piece. And from a security perspective, there's not just the onboarding, but everybody's coming in with their own knowledge set, with their own perspective of how you do an assessment or how you do how you detect if there's something going on with a device. Or there's so many different ways that happens today. And if you have your checklist sitting in a document somewhere, it very rarely gets referenced, right? So one of the areas I see AI really picking up some of that slack is, one, informing analysts or informing leadership of what's going on during an event, and two, helping with tracking those bridges and tracking what's going on and the task assignments that come out of these phone calls, and actually making sure that the lessons learned get rolled back into their processes, right? So being able to learn more about what a person's role is, or if you're new to an organization, have an agent that can help you actually understand your role. I think that feeds into that, continuous feedback loop that is really needed, but people aren't very good at it. We're not very good at taking notes about what happened, or, necessarily following up on, that after actions report that, should encompass everything that everybody did. But now you've got your whole team tied up for 2 weeks writing a report about an incident that you just went through. And I think AI is going to help expedite that, right? It's going to help us be faster and better.
You bring up an interesting point, and I want to dive into that a little bit further. How is AI changing the way organizations approach incident response, which is a critical piece? And how is it helping or impacting the way a vCISO prepares teams, builds response plans, runs tabletop exercises to ensure that the processes they have actually work?
I don't think it's there today. That this is me uh, looking at what we can do with it, and talking about how an organization or a security organization can you leverage it. I don't think we're there today. We're still kind of stuck in the methodologies and the frameworks haven't necessarily incorporated how AI is going to impact that automation phase going into the future, right? We're still early for that, but I think those are some areas that organizations should be looking into. Is how do we use local small models that can help us actually better run an incident response, or better run our detection team, meet those metrics that are becoming more and more important, and not just meeting them, but helping calculate those metrics, right?
Hmm.
I think that's where a lot of organizations fall down today. Josh, what are you seeing?
Oh, we've had two incidents in AI systems. So I had one incident where Microsoft Copilot, one of an employee asked Copilot who's getting laid off in the next quarter, and it told him. And it's
Oh,
because it had access to HR data, and
everything.
the Microsoft Copilot does not have an RBAC model internally natively that says, if I am the CEO and I ask you who's getting laid off, you can tell me because I'm the CEO. But if you're Joe Blow that's down in the organization, you shouldn't respond and tell them that. And the agents are built to be helpful, and
I,
they are more than help. They try to help for everything. And so, yeah, had a breach that was caused by that. And it was really interesting how the ways you had to fix that later. But you have to have different layers of data management and what your agents have access to. It's almost like the same thing from my Marine Corps time. It was classified, unclass, secret, top secret, and so forth. And you had completely separate networks for this. They didn't touch each other. Unclassified did not touch classified systems, right? And it's almost kind of the same thing when you look at your data model for AI. It's like, if this is my most critical, let's just not make that agentic or available to agentic sources right now. It should be segmented anyway. If it's in AWS, it should be in its own VPC. The data needs to be not having all classifications together. That way you can slowly adopt AI management and know that you're not going to kill yourself in some regulatory issue. You just had some breach because you gave it too much information and it did something it never should have done. And I can't control all that yet. I don't have all the maturity and the risk management in place to do that yet. So segment the data just like you would in an ASP SaaS environment and try to do that. Maybe a little bit more difficult, may be harder to do that, especially if all classification of data exists in the same repository now, and you're trying to figure out how would you even tag that as that's critical versus that. Now would I segment that from the agent? Becomes very, very difficult to kind of do that. But you can see very much in the same way companies use and onboard people to HR systems. I'm seeing agents being onboarded to HR systems and getting employee
Right.
IDs and getting email accounts, and they're looking just like the human workforce that's there. So you could see pretty soon in the future, the security of the agents is going to have to move to some HR platform or enforced through some HR platform. It's not just the technology controls there. So you can see some integration of like a, popular PeopleSoft or one of the or Oracle Financials or Oracle HR, whatever it is, integrating more agentically with the solutions you have just because of that.
Right. Yeah, that's a deep subject. We could talk forever on that.
Let's talk about finally. We got to wrap this up at some point here. So we'll make this the last question for today, and I'll ask you both to respond from your different perspectives. When a serious event occurs in an organization, such as ransomware, which can take an organization down completely, versus a more typical kind of network intrusion, the consequences and response strategies can and should be very different. How should organizations think about preparing for these kinds of scenarios, and what role does a vCISO actually play in helping the leadership build that kind of operational taxonomy and decision framework to manage this kind of cyber risk effectively in the organization?
Yeah, that's
Josh,
a
you
good
want to
question.
take the first stab at it?
Sure. Well, ransomware and a normal intrusion are completely different in which the way you handle it. Let's say you have a ransomware actor that's pre-encryption that's there. You're seeing a C2 outbound. You see the guy's logged on to your Fiend backup. You're trying to say, why is this service account doing this? You immediately start to disconnect the account, and then all of a sudden the encryption phase starts and starts blowing you away. You don't want to trigger that off. You have to do a lot of analysis and find out how do they have persistence? How are they communicating? What are they doing? That way, when you go to shut them out, you hit all those avenues. And if you don't, then they could trigger encryption and you have a big mess on your hand. A lot of times it may be after encryption's already started. Now, once you've had that incident, now you're into containment and you're trying to stop the continuous spread of it, and you move into incident response, disaster recovery. So if it's a normal intrusion, you don't have to worry as much about the other phases of that for the restoration and so forth. So you can do a regular investigation. But ransomware or suspected ransomware IOCs go off, you need to be careful on your response because you can trigger the bad stuff to happen on you.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point. Is you do have to handle it differently, and I know a lot of times we get pulled in after it's already been ransomed, and they're saying, what do you what do we do, right? And there's organizations, some of them with when you get into the operational technology piece, um, and you look at how ransomware works. you have to realize that it doesn't, for an organization that has that runs critical infrastructure, a lot of times that ransomware doesn't have to get into the OT environment to cause an operational outage that cascades across the whole organization, right? If they get into the right operational system, say a ticketing system, or say they get into a dispatch system, or depending on the industry, there's a lot of different systems that are really key, but oftentimes sit in the IT network. However, the OT network can't do anything without it, right? That situation, I think we see more and more happening in these OT environments. And while a lot of times, in an OT environment, it's not as much of a blind ransomware as it is a targeted attack that they're slowly moving across the environment and gaining their footholds, and maybe they'll plant some Easter eggs if they get kicked off the network, those sort of things. But it's not it's not the same as a ransomware that hits a production system and takes your entire organization offline. So, to Josh's point, you don't want to tip your hand. You can't tip your hand and let them know what you know. And the second you start making changes to actually kick them out, that's when they let you know they're there. I've actually talked to people who they were ransomed, they paid the ransom, and the organization came back to them a month later and said, you need to pay the ransom again if you want your network back, right? And they then offered them a fantastic deal. They said, we've patched all your systems and actually secured them. So you now have a secure network, but we control it. If you pay us 10 grand a month, we'll act as your IT support. Which is really interesting how they're kind of shifting this ransomware into an IT services model. But what's most interesting about it is the person that was talking about this said, I get better customer service from this ransomware organization than I did from any IT organization I've ever hired. So it's kind of a scary world we live in where, ransomware, you got to realize they're not usually going to just do it once and then when you pay them disappear. They're going to come back, and they're going to come back over time. So you have to make sure you've weeded them out of the entire system. And that takes quite a bit of effort to hunt all that down and perform the actual activities you need to do to properly secure an environment after a ransomware attack.
That's pretty amazing. Ransomware is a managed service, huh?
I don't know, Josh, you ever seen anything like that out there? I'm sure
Yeah,
you've got some
yeah,
crazy
yeah.
stories.
Just like we use channel partners and ransomware actors, and they use different partners and do different things. It's a crazy world we kind of live in, and it's going to be like this for a while. So ransomware you think would have been solved a while back, and it's not. I thought account takeover would be solved, and it's not. People sending emails saying change your accounting and routing number because of this email they received from a vendor, and they automatically did it from an email. I've had 2 of those in the last 3 months.
Yep.
That was happening 20 years ago. 20 years ago in email, people were doing that, and still works today.
Now become a neighborhood topic, right? You have
Yeah.
the friends in the neighborhood who, they're a executive assistant and they did that, and it really impacted their lives, right? Like people were mad at them within the company, their job
Company
was
went out
at
of business.
risk. It's not a good situation to be in.
I got to tell you, the last one I was in, the attacker got fished their username and password, knew what bank they used based on some PPP loan data that got released by the government. So they knew that this company, this law firm, was working with this bank. And so they impersonated the bank and said that we have about $25,000 worth of fraudulent ACH charges, about 3 of them here. One for this amount, one for this amount, one for this amount. Do you authorize that? And she goes, no, absolutely not.
Wow.
Never authorized that. And he goes, okay, we're going to stop that. So I'm going to send a code to your phone. You're going to receive a code for the transaction. It's to halt it. So just tell me what the number is when you receive it. It's my way of authenticating you. And it wasn't.
Yeah.
That was the code to initiate the transaction because they were in the
Yeah.
account already. So when she got the code, she goes 2549, whatever it was, and she released all three of those wire ACH
Yep.
transfers. But you would say,
It's
okay, that's stupid. You never should give a code to somebody calling to say that. However, there's organizations that are doing that now, and they have different software that says, I'm trying to authenticate you. You should see a message going to your phone. Well, now we confuse the user community. Now it makes them susceptible to fraud.
Yeah, the second you get a phone call from somebody saying, "Hey, I'm from your bank and I'm making sure that this was, an unauthorized transaction." I've had those calls, and the second they say, "Give me your code," it's about to be sent to you. I'm like, "Nope, gotta go." That's you, your bank's never gonna do that to you. You have to,
Yeah.
and people do, but it's easy to get caught. I mean, I I was on the phone for a couple of minutes before I figured out it was a scam. And some
Mhm.
people you've got to really watch that. That's basically an MFA bypass, right?
Well, I'll tell you what they did to my nephew here, where he was going to buy a rental here in Charlotte, and he found one that's nice, great neighborhood, everything. But he noticed the address is on two places. It's on Realtor.com, but he also sees it on Craigslist. So he sees it in Craigslist, but it's the same property link, but it's also $500 less a month in rent.
Mm.
And so you call the guy, and that keyed me off. Something's not right. But what they did is he contacts the guy on the platform and says, "Hey, I'm interested in the place." He sends him an email with a link to fill out this information, and it's going to generate a code, and you can go see the place. And so he gets the code, he goes, sees the place, and he says, "Yeah, this is great. I'm going to take it." And he goes, "Uncle Josh, can you do me a favor? Just look at the contract before I sign this thing." All right. So I start looking through it and so forth. What really strange, it really stuck out to me is, why is this house like $500 less a month on Craigslist rather than the realtor? And it's the same thing. And I asked him, and it was just a terrible, terrible story. He's trying to get around fees and everything. And nothing was smelling. But he was right about to sign the contract, give him $2,000. Well, this was a scammer. What he did is he
Mhm.
pushed them to the real realtor site. You sign up the form, you get the code, you go into the place. The thing takes 24 hours anyway in most cases. But he got the code to go in. Since it looked like he had access to the place, I gave you the form to get in. It looks like you have ownership because you gave access. Access indicates ownership, right? And it was all a scam to steal $2,200 from it. And that is
Wow.
happening left and right.
That's a
We had to
lot.
go back to Craigslist and report it to him, and this guy is doing that. And what'll happen is you give him the $2,200, and he tells you you could go move in, and you move in, and you get arrested for breaking and entering. It's not your property. And so you're
Yeah.
sitting there in jail with the loss of the $2,200, and you just got completely scammed. And
The scammers are
that is,
getting more and more inventive every day. So
yeah,
gotta keep
yeah.
your heads up.
Well, let's wrap up this conversation there, gentlemen. This has been a great conversation. Appreciate you both joining us today. One of the things that really stands out in this discussion is that cybersecurity is no longer just about deploying tools. It's about leadership. It's about understanding how cyber risk connects to operational risk. And it's about building the structures, processes, and decision frameworks that allow organizations to respond effectively when something actually happens. The role of the vCISO is becoming increasingly important in that process, not just as a security advisor, but as someone who helps organizations translate cyber threats into operational decisions that leadership can act on. We also covered how artificial intelligence is beginning to reshape everything from risk management to incident response, the importance of realistic tabletop exercises, and why organizations need to think differently about incidents like ransomware when operational technology is involved. For leaders responsible for critical systems, production environments, and industrial operations, these are not theoretical discussions anymore. These are decisions that directly affect uptime, safety, and business continuity. Joshua, Terry, thank you both for sharing your perspectives and your experience. And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us for another episode of the Cyber Fusion Report. If you found this conversation valuable, be sure to follow the show and share it with someone responsible for cybersecurity operations or risk leadership in industrial environments, because the organizations that will be most resilient in the years ahead will be the ones that learn how to connect cybersecurity strategy with operational reality. Until next time. This has been the Cyber Fusion Report podcast. Thanks for joining us. And for more information, please visit www.fishcloud.com or email us at cfc@fishcloud.com. Thanks and have a great day.